Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
December 27, 2019, the Kalanick Cashes Out edition. We'll just take that as our lead story, as our first story. As reported in the Washington Post, Uber co-founder Travis Kalanick has cut his last ties with the ride-hailing giant by selling nearly $2 billion worth of stock. Kalanick said in a statement, "Uber has been part of my life the past 10 years. At the close of the decade, and now with the company public, it seems like the right moment for me to focus on my current business and philanthropic pursuits." As many readers and listeners will recall, Kalanick was unceremoniously fired from the CEO role, or at least resigned under pressure from the board because of his missteps around the company and as it led up to going public. The public offering was not as successful as it was hoped. Nevertheless, Kalanick is a very wealthy individual going forward. Next up, what is in your supply chain and what is the risk in your supply chain? And I take it in a little bit different direction today, as we have an article from the New York Times about crisis looms in antibiotics as drug makers go bankrupt. First, Big Pharma fled the field, and now startups are going belly up, threatening to stifle the development of new drugs. At a time when germs are becoming more resistant to common antibiotics, many companies are developing new versions of drugs, and these companies are hemorrhaging money and going out of business, gravely undermining concern about the ability to contain the spread of new deadly drug-resistant bacteria. And so for hospitals, you need to understand who's in your supply chain and what is the financial health of that company. That's certainly, if you've ever listened to my Innovation and Compliance podcast with Rapid Ratings, they advocate that financial health is a key indicator of your third-party partners. Next up, from Dylan Toker over at the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal, just an excellent article where he interviewed Mathew Miner, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General and head of the criminal division, who looked at, or rather talked about, how the Department of Justice views compliance programs and why they are so important in assessing whether the department will prosecute under the FCPA. It's a wide-ranging interview, and as always, Dylan writes up a great piece, but it's an important interview that it reemphasizes the importance of the corporate compliance program, and it emphasizes it not simply at the time that the enforcement action is concluded, but the time the incident occurred and throughout the remediation. So it really speaks to why ongoing monitoring and continuous improvement are critical from the Department of Justice's perspectives around compliance programs. And finally, I often say that execution is where the rubber meets the road, certainly when it comes to third-party management. And that third-party management includes post-acquisition integration in the M&A case. And we have another article from the Wall Street Journal which talks about the integration at Eventbrite after it purchased the company Ticketfly. And the new CFO at that company, Lanny Baker, has talked about how the company had to really work to stabilize itself after the integration. So you need to think of a variety of things when it comes to integration. Obviously, if you're a compliance practitioner and compliance professional, the compliance perspective is going to be one of them. But stabilizing a company during integration and execution is where rubber meets the road when it comes to that. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.